Hi everybody. This is the Stratosphere Lounge, and I've got all kinds of weird audio feedback going on here. Apparently, I'm getting levels. I just can't hear the feedback today. So I got this guy fixed as a result of the last one, but now we've got this. Some odd reason my headsets are not giving me the audio feedback, and that's probably not a problem as long as you guys can hear me. I'll just look at the levels and I'll do the show without the headphones on, and it's a weird feeling, I gotta tell you, to not have to be able to hear your own self in the monitors. I, for the life of me, don't know what it is. It's just something different every day. I'd kind of like to get rid of this Ustream, to be perfectly honest with you. I don't know if there's a better way to do this. I've been arguing about it forever, but it's, I don't know. We plugged in just a regular stick thumb drive, and next thing I know, my wireless mic isn't working, and now my headphones, which haven't changed in the last weeks, isn't giving me any feedback. So it's a little easier hearing your own voice when you do this, but we can do it without it. So we'll see what we get out of this show today. How's everybody doing? I hope everybody's doing really well. It's great to be here. Valentine's Day here at the Stratosphere Lounge, as I'm sure many of you know. And that's okay too. Let's see if I can get a little more level out there. Whoa. Crazy. It's just crazy. But, nope, it's gone. I'll take a look at that later. Anyway, I hope everybody's having a good time. It's been an interesting week. Well, as I say, we have a lot of changes coming up for the site, and improvements and other things that have been going on. We've got some good news with the common sense resistance, and I can't really close any of those things away up until we get it completely finalized. But I know you guys want to know that there's been some real progress on some things. We're going to be really I'm just as excited as I can be. I've actually at this point gotten the common sense resistance down to sort of a low budget feature story, and I think we're going to get a chance to do that. So we will actually be able to tell a story and put in all kinds of cool compositing and all kinds of gunshots and tell a little story and use that as the picture frame for the common sense resistance. And I'm hoping to see some movement on actually getting that locked down by, hopefully by the end of February. Other than that, it's been just another week of on the treadmill and trying to feed the content into the furnace. I hope everybody out there is doing well. And just watching the lawlessness continue. The president once again waves the finger and delays the law again. And I don't know if anybody else has had enough of this, but I know I certainly have. I just don't know what to say about it that I haven't said already. So anyway, we've got the Stratosphere Lounge. It's kind of a wild card show tonight, where we get to basically took any questions and dealer's choice for change and put a little bit of limits on the Tiemans. Who everybody's down on the Tiemans, by the way. We got a kind of a running joke with Zachariah and the other Tiemans brothers, but they win the thumbs up because either they are providing the best questions, which I usually like, or they've got an army of Zeman bots that go in and uptick them. But on any event, here we are on Valentine's Day. So let's start with the first two because I think they're related. Patrick Dillon. I don't have a super long time tonight, despite speculation to the contrary. I do have someplace I have to be a little later on tonight. Patrick Dillon says, Joshua Argian says, Patrick Dillon says, show us your best useless talent, which was, I thought, connected to Joshua Argian saying, Bill, can you do us a famous impression? I can do a couple of impressions. They're not very good. That's why it's a useless talent. I think if I had any skill at it, I could turn it into money. I can do two impressions that I'm aware of. I do a lot of accent work, mostly just for fun, and it's kind of fun to play around with accents and just goof and giggle a little bit. I think I might have said on one of these shows, I did a movie once. I was a production manager back I must have been 23, 24, 25, right out of college. And I was playing a very bit role. I was playing a chef, and I was doing an Italian accent for the chef. And I was in the trailer most of the time with the rest of the crew. And I just couldn't shake this accent for 3 days. I mean, I just couldn't break it. I just stayed in it, just loved it, thought it was fun. But I do the occasional accents. But an impression, the only reason I'm calling these impressions is because I don't know what else to call them. They're not very good impressions by any means. But the one point I was going to make about an impression is that a lot of it obviously is the voice and the inflection. That's what we think of when we have an impression. But really, in order to make an impression effective, you really have to have you got to say the right things. You got to have the right statement to make the case that this is in fact an impression. So the only two impressions I can do are Rod Serling and William Shatner. I don't do very good one of either of them, but at least I know what the guy's supposed to say. So I did the Rod Serling impression a long time ago. There was when I got to the University of Florida Theater Department, we did a directing class. I was directing one, and I remember they assigned. It was kind of cool because you usually got to pick your own show, but one of the exercises was they gave everybody in the directing class the same play. So we all got to see the same play, or at least one act of the same play. And everybody got Waiting for Godot, which is an interesting play. It's a great play. And so everybody did a different version of Waiting for Godot. And those of you who know the play, it's a French existentialist play, and it's about these two men who are waiting for this third man, Godot, and they just wait and wait and wait, and it's traditionally set out by a barren tree out in the middle of a road someplace. Just two guys, and chatting and waiting for Godot, and the Godot is God. There's two men basically waiting for God to appear, and it's this whole existential French thing from the 50s, and, it's typically French, typically pretentious, but everybody had a chance to take a shot at it, so most people did versions of the standard thing. One person built a giant mobile, and this mobile had scenes from the play, images from the play, and they hung it in the center of the room, and this thing spun overhead, so they'd reference this or they'd reference that, and it was in the mobile over their head, and it was like a thought balloon for them. I thought that was really interesting. But I did my Waiting for Godot on the surface of the moon, and we had a big chapel. It used to be a chapel, this room. It tells you where universities are heading, right? It's a chapel. And so they had these two giant Gothic windows, and the foot of the Gothic windows were high. I mean, the bottom of the sill of these things were 10 feet above the ground easily. And so what I did was I had two guys sitting there, one in each one of these Gothic windows, and I had little stairs and stuff go up there. And basically I set it on the moon, and they were waiting for Commander Buck Godot, who was overhead in the orbiting command module, and they were waiting for him to come down and rescue them, which of course he couldn't do. He's in a command module. But these two guys were stuck on the moon. That was the basis of it. And so I played the beginning, and I did my Rod Serling impression, and then these guys descended down the ladder in slow motion, and I had the theme from 2001: Space Odyssey, also Sprach Zarathustra, playing. And on that final dun-dun, they stepped out onto this cushion, and nobody had known it, but in advance I'd filled the cushion up with chalk dust, so the second they put their feet down, there's this big puff of dust, and it was great. I'll get on with it. But that's how I got the Rod Serling impression. I had to do it for that, so I had to do the Rod Serling impression. And this is from, this piece of dialogue is from Manhattan Transfer version of Twilight Tone that they did. And let's see if I can get this straight. You need a cigarette and a skinny tie and stuff. But Rod Serling has this very odd syncopation. It's like, submitted for your approval. One Mr. Miller, who's about to take a trip into oddness and obsolescence. Accompanying him on this fateful journey is the mesmerizing sound of the Twilight Zone. There you go. I see him. I'm watching all the Twilight Zone episodes in sequence. He looks like he must have been very tiny, but it's very clipped and it's very bitter. It's you unlock the door to a fifth dimension, a dimension not only of sight and sound but of mind, a dimension whose boundaries are that of imagination, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. It's just classic stuff. He's just really great. He's really, really great. I miss him. I thought he was a genius. And every time I look at those Twilight Zone episodes, I realize he not only invented the he just invented the format. He just invented the weird twist, the surreal sense of reality and surreality mixed together. And he was, Night Gallery was okay, but you could just tell Night Gallery just wanted to be Twilight Zone so badly, and just really wanted to be the Twilight Zone really, really badly. So yeah, that Rod, and all you see when you see Rod Serling do an impression is all you see are his lower teeth. He's just got these lower teeth, and it's like everything's very clipped. Dimension of sight, dimension of sound, dimension of mind. And he never opens his teeth. You're traveling through a dimension of ideas. I'm trying to remember that copy. Of things and ideas. The next stop, the signpost up ahead, the Twilight Zone. It's very clipped. It's really fun. But the actual, the Twilight Zone opening speech changed several times. I don't know if it changed every season, but it changed several times. And the ding, 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 that didn't come until, I don't know if it was the second or third season, but the first season is very different. It opens with kind of these webby sort of, things moving back and forth. And I think Bernard Herrmann might have done the original score. And that's the one. That's the actual narration I like the best. Let me see if I can find it. Because if you can find it, you can read it. Because he did several versions, and I thought they got worse, actually. Yeah, I think this is the one I want right here. Now, here's a later one. The later one was, you're traveling to another dimension. A dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. A journey into a wondrous land whose boundaries are that of the imagination. At the signpost up ahead, your next stop, the Twilight Zone. But the original was better. Let's see if I can find that real quick. Yeah. Yeah, the first dimension of the first read of the Twilight Zone thing was really, really cool. Apparently there was a. Let's see if I can find it. But the show I thought got better and better, and the graphics and the interesting stuff got better and better, but it just, I don't know. I thought that opening narration got worse. So here's a bunch of them. Season 1, seasons 3, 2, 4, and 5. Apparently everyone. So 4 and 5 had the same one. All right, here we go. I'll give you all of them, since you asked. Yeah, it almost murphed into a Shatner there. I'd give you Bill Shatner reading the Twilight Zone thing. Maybe I'll do that in a minute. The first season was, there is a fifth dimension beyond that which is known to man. It's a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It's the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition. And it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It's an area which we call the Twilight Zone. Yeah. And then it became you're traveling through another dimension, a dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind, a journey into a wondrous land of imagination. Next stop, the Twilight Zone. That wasn't as good. It just wasn't as good. So that's Rod. And then I'm happy to say that to the degree that I can also mangle another impression, mangle them badly, I got this from my friend Maurice LaMarche, who does International Talk Like William Shatner Day. So I had the guy who came up with International Talk Like William Shatner Day teach me how to do a William Shatner impression. He said there's a couple things in there that's really, really cool. One of them is he says that Shatner always has a sharp intake of breath at the end of a sentence, as if his breath for the next sentence doesn't come at the top of the next sentence. It comes at the end of the previous sentence. He's got a lot of like that. And obviously the weird pauses, but it's the hand gestures. If you can get the hand gestures in there, you really, you can really get that Shatner thing. It's like, and you got to know what to say. It's like, it's got to be like, but Spock, there's got to be another way. And it's just, there's got to be another way. That's just, I don't know. He's doing the dealing and stuff, and yeah, everybody's saying I should be doing Rod Serling a little deeper. I don't know if I have that kind of depth in my voice. There's a fifth dimension between that which is known to man. And it's the other thing about Serling, and I want to be crystal clear, I'm not doing this as a guy who's doing a good impression. I'm just doing a guy who's observing his impression. Is it when you watch when you watch Rod Serling speak, he's always smiling. He's always got this smile, even when he's doing something really serious. He's got this little smirk. He's got, you see the little bottom teeth of his. He's just got this little. There's a dimension beyond that which is known to man, and that's another thing, is a known to man. Very declarative kind of thing. It's a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. That's awesome. And the Shatner thing you could just do all day. You just got to have a really great Shatner line. You got to just have something like there's got to be another way. It's a shining city. You can't just break it up. You can't just put pauses in there, because I don't know what it is. I'd heard that Shatner actually was in a. I heard that he was in a show, and it was a really bad show, and he knew it was a bad show, and this was when he was a stage actor before he ever got any TV roles, and he just went in there to start breaking it up just to make it readable or interesting, and I suppose maybe that's the truth. But Shatner says he's never understood what a Shatner. Shatner says he doesn't understand the Shatner impression. He doesn't hear it. I don't know if he's being silly or not. Let's see if I can find some Captain Kirk quotes. Give us some material to chew on here. Best quotes by Captain James T. Kirk of Star Trek. I'll show up your trial as a character witness, if you think that'll help. We've got to risk implosion. We may explode into the biggest fireball in this part of the galaxy's ever seen, but we've got to take that 1 in a million chance. I don't know. I just have had one or two sentences that I'm able to play around with and get that right. I do a decent accent. I tell an Irish joke in an Irish accent that I like quite a bit. But generally, war is... I don't know. I shouldn't have taken this chance anyway, because it is a useless talent. I'll work on both of them. But, I love them both, obviously, needless to say. They're both a big part of my psyche, and both of these 1950s, 1960 guys are a big part of my psyche. By the way, parenthetically, William Shatner was in 2 of my favorite Twilight Zone episodes. Everybody remembers him in Terror at 20,000 feet or 30,000 feet or whatever it is, where he's the guy who's just had a nervous breakdown, sees the gremlin out on the wing. But another one that he's very, very good at is the one where he's in the cafe with his wife, and there's this little... fortune-telling machine, and you push a button, you put in a quarter, push a button, and a little paper fortune comes out. And the fortunes are all completely nondescript. They're very, very generic, like could be, or maybe later, or interesting question, or whatever. And that episode is about the power of superstition. And in that one, he and his wife escape, and then there's another couple that's also trapped by this thing, but they don't escape. They keep coming back to get more and more messages out of this thing. That the thing is not saying anything. That was the genius of that episode, was these predictions that were coming out of Predicto, the giant coffee table prediction machine, were so bland and generic and could be interpreted any different way. It was really a profound sort of a shot at things like horoscopes and psychic advice and that kind of thing. So that's another one of my favorites. Anyway, enough of that nonsense. Let's move on to something where I'm decent at. Here we go. Let's wind this one up. Yeah, okay, well, let's get some credibility back after that appalling display. Here we go. I saw this one last night, and I thought, last night especially, I was getting this real blast of allergies. I got these Santa Ana winds coming in, and I'm having a hard time seeing. I was really sniffly and eyes hurt, and I didn't really want to do anything really tough last night. But I saw this question, and I'm assuming it was written in a manner designed to taunt me. I don't know. Maybe this person actually believes it. I suspect not. But anyway, here's the question. Our shining city on the hill, our beacon of liberty, was founded by committing atrocities against Native Americans and taking their freedom and forcing them elsewhere and onto reservations. We've also not led the world in other things, such as the abolition of slavery, women's suffrage, civil rights, and women's rights. Does the good America has done simply outweigh the bad? What are your thoughts on this? My thoughts on this are as follows. There's no question that virtually everything in the first sentence anyway is essentially true. But I think that's an extremely progressive slander in terms of how things are going. And so, you have to be careful when you talk about things like the Indians and slavery and all that other stuff, because you don't want to come out sounding like you're defending the actual harm that we did do. And we did do an awful lot of harm, and there's an awful lot of things that America's done that America shouldn't be proud of. And I don't think you get any points defending things that you shouldn't be proud of. You shouldn't defend things that you shouldn't be proud of. Some things are indefensible, and some things are just utterly morally wrong. And so let's just start off by saying that, needless to say, slavery is an absolute moral evil, and the situation with the Indians is, at the very, very least, it's a historical tragedy. But now that I've said all those things, let me answer this question and bring some perspective here. So he starts off by saying we started off by committing atrocities against Native Americans. I'd be willing to bet you that most of the atrocities that were committed in the ongoing cohabitation between whites and Native Americans here in North America, I'd be willing to bet you that the initial atrocities were committed by the Native Americans. And I think there were plenty of scalps taken and a lot of raping and a lot of burning of homesteads that ever happened. Well, I know this is the case because we didn't have a cavalry. The Pilgrims didn't arrive with cavalry. The Pilgrims didn't arrive with guys in cuirasses and blunderbusses and axes and swords. The guys who first came to this country to live with the Indians were peaceful pilgrims. And so whatever atrocities were committed to start this running 400-year bloodbath were committed by the Native Americans. Period. They say that the Native Americans found the Pilgrims starving and gave them food, but if you actually get down to what really actually happened, it's only the ability to farm and to create agriculture that does the food production. If anybody's starving consistently across this spectrum of people, it was probably the the Indians. I'm going to call them Indians because that's what they like to call themselves. And that's their name, and it means Indians means Indios, people in God. They were thought to be noble savages by the people who named them. So the Indians, and by the way, Native Americans, as many people have said, do they want to be named after the people that conquered them? Native Americans means what? It means they were the first humans here, but they weren't born here. The Indians didn't grow up in North America. The Indians came from somewhere else, just like everybody else did. And so if you want to get down and start blaming the Europeans for colonizing the New World, you can also get down and blame the ancestors of the Indians who came over the Bering Straits 100,000 years ago, depopulated all the large animals in the country, like the giant ground sloth. The predecessors of the Indians did all of that. So just a couple things about the Native Americans that I think have gone just a little bit too far off into the side of hating the white man. First thing I'll say about this is, as I said, I think the first atrocities had to have been committed by the Native Americans. We didn't have an army. We didn't have the ability to commit atrocities or enforce our warpath will on anybody for the first century or two here. People think about Native American culture and they think about the noble Indian on the horse. And the tribes, the kind of Lakota, Sioux kind of Indian tribes on horseback out on the Great Plains. And that's how we all think of Indians. But the horse isn't native to North America. The horse was brought over by Europeans. The entire Indian culture, as we understand Indian culture, is only due to the horse, and the horse is due to introduction by the Europeans. So prior to the Europeans coming, there were no noble Lakota warriors on horses. They were on foot. And this business about the Indians being this collection of totally peaceful humans who did nothing but weave baskets and extend the hand of friendship to everyone they meet, and use every single part of the buffalo, and these moral angels that they're made out to be. It just doesn't work like that, and it historically is not true. All of the Indian tribes were at war with other Indian tribes for their entire lives, as is the true for primitive people everywhere. This idea that civilization, and European civilization especially, is particularly warlike is just not borne out by statistics. you find that the more primitive the society is, the more time it spends at war. And the most primitive societies are at war all the time. And the reason for that is pretty simple. The more primitive your society is, the more limited your resources are. The more limited your resources are, the more you are in competition to steal or disrupt other people's resources. And once you start farming, you suddenly have more food than you can eat yourself, as a general rule. So the idea that the North American Indian on his horse was there before we got there and just grew up out of the land is false on two accounts. Indians aren't from North America, and horses aren't from North America. Indians came over the Bering Strait, and the horses came over the Europeans. There's some evidence, it's reasonably compelling evidence, there's some evidence that it's possible that parts of the northeastern United States were settled by Europeans prior to the Asian people who came over from the Bering Strait on the other side of the country. There's some evidence of some European civilizations that may have actually predated them. I don't know if that's true or not. Let's go on a little bit more about this. This idea that we exterminated the Indians with biological weapons. We sent them, smallpox-infected blankets. First of all, I think there's only one case that was ever historically shown to be that is what happened. And in all of those cases, they all happened before we had germ theory. People thought smallpox was caused by emissions from the air and decaying wood. Nobody knew that smallpox was transmitted through disease vectors because we didn't have any sense of the idea of germ theory. So the idea that we gave Indians blankets filled with smallpox as a means to exterminate them with biological weapons is just plain wrong. It's just not true. It just didn't happen. So when you hear Europeans say, well, yes, it's true the Nazis exterminated the Jews, but the Americans exterminated the Indians, you got a pretty big difference in the two situations there, and I can sum that up for you pretty easily. In the case of the Jews and the Nazis, men with guns went in and rounded up entire families of men, women, and children who didn't have guns, put them into camps and starved them to death, and then ran them into ovens and gassed them to death and killed them in mass numbers in order to exterminate them. The war between the white Americans and the American Indians was a war. It was a war that happened on horseback primarily between bands of warriors, our warriors versus their warriors. Our warriors occasionally, in cases like Wounded Knee, went in and massacred their women and children. But the number of Indian massacres of white women and children on an individual basis it's limitless. It's unnumbered. It's thousands and thousands of cases of Indian warriors massacring individual farmers and their wives and raping their wives and taking their children into slavery or killing their children. That's an ongoing battle between warriors. And I'm not an American Indian, but I've known a few of them, and the ones that I did speak to about this subject just danced around it, really. I didn't pretend to get the depth of their feelings about it. One thing I have noticed among modern American Indians is that they kind of resent this idea of this kind of kumbaya Indian, this idea of the Indian just being this peaceful weakling who just sat there and waited to be marched off into extinction. These were warriors, and they fought a tremendous battle, pitched battle that went on for 400 years and often beat far superior forces, at least technologically. They were brave. That's why they called their warriors braves. They were braves. They fought for their culture. Now, I think you can say without question that the greatest shame, I don't have any particular shame about the warfare aspect. I do, without question, find it absolutely appalling, absolutely inexcusable. And inexcusable and appalling the number of treaties that the American government broke with the Indians. It's just the most shameful thing we've done. I mean, it's certainly one of the two most shameful things we've done. That's the U.S. government. That's the government basically lying again and again and again and again and again. And that's just the truth. There's no way around it. That's what it is. But I'm going to get on to the other issues in a minute. But the point I want to make about the American Indians is simply this. This kind of thing has gone on throughout human history. There is no part of Europe, if you hear a Belgian or a European or a Frenchman talking about the way we treated the Indians, ask them what happened to the Celts or the Franks or the Angles or the Saxons. Where did they go? They were killed. They were killed. Europe is the bloodiest soil in the world. Same with China. A number of Chinese dynasties and the Mongols conquered the entire world, slaughtered everybody in their path, and the Egyptians slaughtered everybody in their path. And frankly, if you really want to make a case for native people in North America, you will have to look throughout history backwards and forwards, and you will never find a more repulsive, disgusting, horrific living nightmare on earth than the Aztecs, and to some lesser degree the Mayans and the Incas. The Aztecs were the worst civilization that's ever inhabited this planet, in my opinion. These people, these kind Native American people who live close to the land, and brown people who are authentic, not like these white killer apes that came over in boats. The Aztec people formed entire armies, and the armies would simply go up and down their territory and into neighboring territories simply to kill slaves, to capture slaves rather. The slaves would be brought back to their pyramids, and they would have their living hearts cut out from them, sometimes hundreds a day, and then they'd kick the bodies down those steep pyramids, and people down below would skin them and wear their skins for suits. Watch Apocalypto if you want to find out how noble American Indians can be. So what I'm trying to say here is this statement in this question was that America is just such an evil country. The case I'm trying to make is that the evils of America are not unique to America. And boy, we can have a lot more fun with this with slavery than we can with Indians. Because when you start talking about slavery, which again is an absolute moral evil, and there's no way to defend slavery as slavery, but when people try to make slavery a uniquely American disease, now you got some perspective to deliver on them. First thing to know about this is, if you took a look at the number of Africans taken out during the African slave trade, during the 400 or 500 years that people were taking slaves out of Africa, the first thing that you need to know is there are about 11 million Africans taken out of Africa. If you want to take a guess at the number of those people came to America to plantations in the South, how many of the 11 million? Most people would say 10 million, 11 million. It's actually 800,000 or 900,000. The huge majority of slaves pulled out of Africa went to the Caribbean. Almost all of them went to South America or the Caribbean. So the biggest slaveholders of the time, by a factor of almost 10 to 1, were not Americans. They were Europeans. They were Frenchmen in Haiti, and they were Englishmen throughout the colonies. There were any number of slaveholders all throughout that. So there's that. As far as the white man being uniquely evil as far as slavery is concerned, you have to also start asking questions about who delivered the slaves. Those white slave traders, didn't get off their ships and go roaming into the middle of the country, because once you realize that slave traders are on the coast, most people run inland. The huge percentage of the slaves that were sold to white slave traders were sold to them by other black Africans. Black Africans were the people that threw the nets over most of the black Africans that were sold into slavery. People don't want to hear that, but it's true. These black tribes on the coasts of Africa, primarily on the eastern coast of Africa, would go inland in hunting parties, enslave huge numbers of fellow blacks, bring them to the coast, to some of these white slaver trade stations, and sell them to white slave traders for money. So they're in the slavery business too, but in addition to being in the slavery business, they're also traders to the degree that you could be a trader about this kind of thing. So, 10% of the total slaves sold came to America, 9%, 10%, and of most of the slaves that were captured, they're captured by other blacks. That tends to complicate the issue a little bit. Let's go on about this whole uniquely American thing about the slavery too. First of all, let's remember that all of the slaves, virtually without exception, almost all of the slaves that were brought to America, except for a period of 70, 80 years there, were brought to America when America was in fact a British colony. So the slaves that were brought to America to run the plantations in Carolina and the Carolinas and Georgia and Alabama, these were British colonies at the time. It was British people that brought those slaves to America because there hadn't been any Americans yet. And I think it also is an interesting little thought experiment to say, if you really want to run into people who maybe British people or whatever giving you this about this, slavery was abolished in Britain. I want to say it was 1846. It might have been 1844. I think it was 1846. If you take the founding of modern Great Britain as 1066, with the Norman invasion of Britain, William the Conqueror defeating Herod at the Battle of the Hill. What's it called? Oh, golly, flew right out of my head. Anyway, if you take the modern founding of Britain as 1066, Battle of Hastings, and they abolished slavery in 1846, you could say that at least from the beginning of modern Britain, it took them 800 years to abolish slavery. The United States abolished slavery 70 years or 80 years after its founding. So Great Britain abolished slavery in 1846, and they did it with a stroke of a pen, but they weren't dependent upon the slave trade. There were no economic reasons to keep slaves in Great Britain, so they abolished slavery with a stroke of a pen in 1846. We did it 20 years later when a significant portion of our economy was based on slavery, and we killed about 1 million people to do it. About 1 million white people died on both sides. The northern casualties were about 500,000 in combat, but probably more like over 1 million in terms of disease and everything else. Millions of Americans died, white Americans died, to end slavery in America 20 years, not 200 years and not 2,000 years after the British and the rest of the Europeans did it. And I'll go further by saying that that while Britain had abolished the slave trade in 1840s and abolished slavery in England in 1840s, the one thing that Britain didn't abolish was the results of the slavery, the economic benefits of the slavery, because Britain was the virtually entire market for Southern cotton. Virtually all of the cotton that was grown in the South by slaves was bought by the British to be used in their textile mills, where my family came from, up in Lancashire. My family were mill workers for 5-6 generations in Wigan, up in Lancashire. So, it's one thing to say, hey, no more slaves, but we're going to buy all of your slave labor, which is exactly what the British did. So again, this is not to defend slavery, and it's not to say that slavery was a good thing or a swell thing, or it's not to say that slavery isn't shameful. It's to say that slavery is today an ongoing disease, and that prior to the Industrial Revolution, it was the only form of controllable muscle power that a government could bring to bear with any degree of reliability. The pyramids were built by slaves. Virtually everything in the ancient world was built by slaves. Virtually everybody had slaves up until the founding of America and the Enlightenment. And so to blame slavery on America and to say that we liberated slaves late, we liberated slaves 7-8 decades after the founding of our nation, not 7 or 8 centuries after the founding of our national identity. I think that bears a little perspective, and I think it also bears perspective to say that any number of slaves were kept after slaves, that there are still slaves today, that there's slavery going on today, is virtually all at the hands of Arabs. Arabs are enslaving Christians, are enslaving blacks. Other blacks are enslaving blacks. There's a slave trade of Koreans and so on going on. There's millions and millions and millions of people held as slaves today in the world today. Many millions more slaves today than there ever were at the height of the slave trade during the Confederacy. And those are actual physical slaves, not counting the mental slaves and the emotional slaves that the Democratic Party has created in order to keep themselves in power. I'm talking about actual slaves in chains. So I think a little perspective helps us there. And by the way, today, and for 100 years now, 200 years, freedom and slavery has been kind of a binary thing, right? You're either a completely free person or you're a slave. You're held in bondage. But at the time of the Revolution, and at the time of the founding of this country, and at the time of the Confederacy, there were many different degrees of what we would consider to be slavery today. And certainly slavery was at the bottom. You were another person's property. But there were indentured servants. There were people who were basically owed their entire livelihood to somebody else and were their slave until they could pay it off. There were forms of apprenticeship that really basically made that person a slave for 5 years or 10 years or whatever length of time it took them to free their apprenticeship. So indentured servitude and these kind of things were degrees of slavery that we look at today and say those people weren't free. And so, I'm just reluctant to judge people in the past by our standards because I just don't think it's fair. And I just don't think it's fair to them. And this question was just loaded with this. Let's move on. It says, we've not led the world. America's not led the world in the abolition of slavery. Didn't we? The British signed a piece of paper saying we're going to abolish slaves, but we don't have any slaves here. We've had them they've been legal for ever, but at least 800 years since the Norman invasion, but we're going to eliminate them now, even though we don't have any. So it's really no cost to us, but we'll continue to buy the product of slavery over there in the Confederacy. I don't see how that's leading the world in slavery. Leading the world in the abolition of slavery. Leading the world in the abolition of slavery is fighting a giant civil war and killing 1 million people to bring an end to slavery in this country. Civil war didn't start out about slavery, although it did, because when people talk about states' rights, it's about the right of people in certain states to own slaves. That's the only thing it was about. It's absolutely true that the British went around and took to destroying slave colonies and destroying slave ships at sea. But again, they did this 20 years before we did, not 2 centuries and not 5 centuries and not 8 centuries. They'd been around for a long time and tolerated it for a long time before they took action against it. They're the ones who brought the slaves to the New World in the first place, after all, and the French. So Haiti and French slavery continued on long after we'd abolished it, and it goes on today. As far as women's suffrage goes, I think it's a pretty long reach to say that America doesn't lead the world in women's rights. You may be able to make the case that women had the vote in other countries prior to us, but not way prior to the United States. And this idea of modern feminism is an American idea. I don't know anywhere else in the world where you see women employed on the kind of level that they're employed in America today, both as a percentage and in terms of height that they've achieved in their cultures. Certainly, I don't know of any other society in the world that goes to the kind of corrective efforts with things like Title IX and all of these advertisements that every single one of them today, the father and the man is a blithering idiot or is a man-child, and the woman is the sensible, rational, reasonable one who's filling out the checkbook and so on. This idea that we have been lagging in women's suffrage is just not true. I don't know what the gates of the women getting the vote are, but there are many countries that have had it happen after us, and certainly in the vast part of the world today, all around the world today, with 100% truth in the Muslim world today, it's 1 billion people. Women are not even creatures; they're not even people by our standards. If you look at Asian cultures in Japan and China, women are clearly treated as inferiors. As a matter of fact, in China, they're preferentially just killed. They're just killed. You have a baby girl, leave it out in the woods to die. Throw it off a mountain, or you abort it preferentially. So this idea that we are somehow lacking the world in terms of respect for women is an absolute construct. It's not true. Women are not. There's no country in the world that are more highly respected than we have here. We've had women secretaries of state. Britain's had a woman prime minister. That's fantastic. I don't remember anybody in France. Germany's had a woman prime minister. But when you take the Islamic countries and you take Asian culture, you're talking about 2/3 of the world already. People are treated like chattel there. The condition of women in Japan and what they tolerate on subways to this day, and what their penetration into upper levels of management and leadership in corporations is zero. It's zero. So I don't buy your statement either, Brandon, about Americans lagging in women's suffrage. Civil rights, honestly, civil rights, I'm waiting to hear where civil rights are more clearly defended than they are in the United States of America. What does that mean? In America, we had a Bill of Rights, and we defend it. At least we used to. You had the right to speak your mind. You had the right to freely worship. These are all civil rights. If you're talking about civil rights, you're talking about racial equality and things like separate but equal and all of these, segregation and stuff. You can make the case that America has lagged to some degree, but that case doesn't stand, because the only place where America has so-called lagged in terms of things like integration is in places like France or Sweden. But France and Sweden don't have this issue to deal with, and neither did Britain, and neither did Germany, and neither did any of these places for the decades and the centuries that they've been talking about American racism. American racism was discussed by European countries with an attitude of snobby superiority by people like Belgians, who went into the Congo in the early 1900s, not in the 1800s, in the early 1900s, killed 10 million Congolese for King Ludwig's personal gain, his personal gain. Millions and millions and millions of Africans were killed for King Ludwig of Belgium in the 1900s. It's probably the greatest unknown atrocity of all time. Nobody says boo about that. And when you hear French people lecturing us about our racism and how we treat black people, black population in this country has been 10% or around there for 200 years. The percentage of black people in France was essentially 0%. It was Billie Holiday and one or two other American expatriates. And so they could treat them like celebrities and ooh and ah and all that other stuff. But they didn't have to deal with it until suddenly they did. And then starting in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, you started to see Algerians immigrating into France, and you started to see Pakistanis and Indians and other people immigrating into Great Britain, and you started to see Turks immigrating into Germany. And what you find is the level of racism in those countries certainly matches what the United States was at its worst, and certainly exceeds what the United States experiences today. The French will never incorporate the people in those neighborhoods, the Belus or whatever the French name for these unassimilated Muslims are. They'll never be French people. They will always have two different populations. They're never going to fully assimilate into Swedish culture, no matter how hard they try, because Frenchness and Swedishness and Britishness and all these other things are blood and race and location. Americanism is an idea. Somebody comes to America from Mogadishu, or they come from Oslo. They raise their right hands, swear to become law-abiding American citizens. They're as American as anybody else in this country. That is the only place where that happens. So I basically, Brandon, I don't know whether your question was serious or not, but I throw it out on its heels. I completely just throw out the entire premise. I don't think we've lagged the world in these areas. I think if to the degree that we may be having a spotlight shined upon us about these issues, it's because we're the only country in the world that's had to deal with it. We're the only country in the history of the world that has ever had a slave population that did not either exterminate those slaves or has been overthrown by those slaves. We're the only country in the world that's ever had a slave population that we have made gigantic efforts to actually live with as equals. That's never happened before. And it was succeeding here very, very, very well, until the progressives came along and realized that the more integrated black people come into the culture, the more integrated black people become into the economy, the more they start to vote like Republicans. And so they will be constantly reminded of all of these things that either did occur, or exaggerations of things that didn't occur, or did occur, or just flat-out lies of things that didn't occur. I'll close this simply by saying you'll often hear black people today saying we built this country and the white people just sat around and stole our wealth. It's just not true. It's just not true. You can make a case that slave labor built most of the southern cotton economy. That case you absolutely can make. But unfortunately for the argument today, the southern plantation culture and that southern plantation economy was utterly destroyed in the Civil War. And everything that happened after that was accomplished by paid labor. The cities, the northern cities, were built by black workers to some degree, but by much larger percentages of white, Scottish, German, Italian workers. Everybody built America. This idea that black people built America and that white people are just sat around and watch it happen is just a pernicious lie. And black Americans are told that every day in order to gin up their resentment, in order to make sure that they keep voting Democrat in large numbers. And they're the largest percentage of the largest group of enslaved people in the history of this country are black Americans today. They live in a cage with a door that doesn't lock, and they're bound by shackles that don't clasp. They're slaves of their mentality. They're slaves of their brainwashing. And many people, I find, are slaves of their programming, of people who are trapped in cages that have the doors open. I'm really fascinated by this idea. It's one of the images I'm going to use an awful lot in the Common Sense Resistance. In fact, the message of the Common Sense Resistance to the people of the world in 30 years from now is going to be, you are, in fact, the first generation in all of human history who have been slaves of a slaveholding society that has not had a gun to your head or chains around your ankles. You're the first generation of people who voted for slavery, who like slavery, or who make a decision to be slaves. You get the food pellet. So, there you go. By the way, about the racism thing, I guess I might as well just wrap up with one more thing. I might have mentioned this before. I was down in Guantanamo Bay a couple years ago, and there are two imported groups of people there. They import Filipinos to work on the base and Jamaicans. We're required to do this to show the rest of the world how great we are. We don't have American citizens doing most of the work on those bases around the world, at least certainly in Guantanamo. The huge numbers of civilian personnel on Guantanamo Bay Naval Station were Filipinos who did virtually all of the interior work, almost all of the hotel people and the housekeepers and that sort of thing were Filipinos, store clerks, and Jamaicans who did most of the exterior work. And I walked down there. I was down there in May and June, I guess, and I saw black Jamaicans out there in the 100-degree heat, 100% humidity, wearing baseball caps, goggles, scarf around the face, scarf around the neck, white button-down shirts, button to the neck, button to the sleeves, gloves, long pants, socks, and shoes. There was not an inch of skin showing, not an inch. I said, why are these people dressed like this? Has got to be unbearable under there. And the answer was that these Jamaicans are here doing a year or two of work, and when they go back home, if they go back home darker than they were when they came, they will have fewer economic opportunities, because in Jamaica it's just openly accepted that the lighter skin you have, the more economic opportunities you have. When Miss India was crowned, Miss Universe or whatever it was, there was an awful lot of outrage, really, in the country, because if you look at Indian culture, East Indian culture, you find that all of their stars, all of their celebrities, all of their movie stars, their TV personalities, all of their actresses and actors are all extremely light-skinned people. The Indian person, that maybe it was a U.S. person, maybe she became Miss America, I don't remember, but this person was much darker than what they see in India, and that kind of racism exists in India. It exists in China. It exists in Japan. You want to talk about racism? Go to Japan and try to go into Japan as a Korean person, see what kind of treatment you get there. This idea that America is this bastion of racism is just not true. There's no racism worse than there was in India. It still exists today. This business of caste and untouchables and classes of Brahmins on one hand and untouchables on the other. You're talking about 500 million people just utterly enslaved. It's just not true, Brandon. It's just not true. It's been sold to you as uniquely evil, but it's not uniquely evil. It doesn't mean that bad things didn't happen here, and it doesn't mean that there's a great number of things to be ashamed of in the history of America. But they're not unique to America. And in more cases than not, you'll find that not only are they not unique to America, America has made a particularly strong effort to correct those injustices in a way that other countries never have. You never hear anybody even talk about the Belgian Congo, let alone making it up to those people. That's what I would say about that. Moving on. Jennifer Kearns-Lechner says, Bill, do you ever look back at recent political conversation and say, I wish I'd said this or that? Or is there a level of mastery in which the right things to say come naturally and automatically? Jennifer, I was going to take that question and just say no. Honestly, I don't ever recall ever having a time when I said I wish I'd said that. There have been many times when I've been a little surprised, maybe as surprised as you guys are, that I had the ability to speak clearly about something, especially extemporaneously. This week I'm going to post the Ramona speech I did, and then we took about 5 or 6 questions. They were great. And I thought the responses were great because the questions were very deep and they were very hard. And I was kind of going to your issue here about, where does that come from? I mean, how do you have the ability to come up with an answer that seems cogent, in the words of my friend Ian, cogent, coherent, and concise? Where does that come from? I suppose it just comes from what you say here. It's a level of mastery. And to me, it's just the level of mastery is just, I just know this stuff. I'm interested in it. I have an excellent memory for things, especially for anecdotes. And once you start thinking about things enough, I used to feel this way about science. I didn't think about politics because I didn't read about politics, didn't care about politics, didn't give politics the slightest bit of attention for most of my life. But I found when I was first thinking about science that the great thing about knowing how to think would be if you got a new piece of information or a new theory, something like that, it would fit, it would go someplace, and it would belong to something. You could connect it to other pieces, and then these pieces would form, they'd form a pattern or a result that you could count on. Then you could build on that, and then something new would be discovered, or you'd read something new for the first time, and that fits in here and locks in there, and so on. It's the same thing that's true for me with politics. I find that this conservatism is, as we understand conservatism, is largely true. And I don't mean that to be any less strong than it sounds. It's mostly true. It's virtually all true. The reason I know it's true is because it's internally consistent. It's based on nature. We get evidentiary responses that come back. We get quantification. We get predictive value of stuff that just seems to be true. And I, as I've said many times, I'm sure, I used to worry about meeting like the liberal Goliath and just getting my butt handed to me by somebody who just took me apart. I don't worry about that anymore. That person doesn't exist because liberalism doesn't make that kind of sense. And so when I'm confronted with a question, I usually know the answer about it because I've thought about it or spoken about it before. Stratosphere Lounge really helps me in a lot of ways here. And somebody said the Stratosphere Lounge is anything but concise. It's not supposed to be concise, Rich. The whole purpose of the Stratosphere Lounge is to be stream of consciousness for 2 hours. But the idea of these things really does come to me as modules, and I'll think of something or have an idea or a thought, and that thought then becomes kind of a module. And when I do speaking engagements, usually what I do is I just sit in the green room prior to going on, and I mean half an hour, 15 minutes prior to going on, and I'll make a 6, 7, 8 line set of notes, 7, 8 lines on the back of a napkin, literally back of an envelope or on one index card. And I'm going to talk about this, and this in this order. And once I get out there, I glance down and I see it, and I know that kind of module, and I'm familiar with it, know how to phrase it, and I do it. So that's how that works. And mastery is important to me, Jennifer. I'm at the age now where I feel like one of the things that is important to me as I get older, as I get capable and competent in a number of fields, there's not a whole bunch of new things that I really want to try. I don't have a sudden burning desire to be really suddenly take up things that I hadn't taken up. It's not to say aren't things that I wouldn't enjoy. Maybe I'd go nuts over skydiving or something, but I don't feel like I'm going to suddenly develop a passion for gardening, let's say. And so the things I am good at, I want to be excellent at. I want to master. Because once you achieve a level of mastery in anything, I feel like I'm a master pilot. It's important to me to be good at a pilot, and it's a point of pride for me to be a good pilot. And when I am being a good pilot, it makes me happy. And when I make a mistake, it makes me sad, and it makes my eyes rain. And I tell myself, don't do that again. I take it seriously, and I study it, and I think about it a lot. And so these are areas I want to be good at, and this is one of those areas too. Now, with all of that said, I have to tell you, and I know I've been kind of skirting around this, but I just read it once, thanks to one of our fine Stratosphere Lounge people. I have to tell you something. I read this book on RK selection, on the behavioral antecedents and explanations for liberalism and conservatism, and that book opened my eyes in a way that nothing I've ever read ever has. That book to me is like that must have been what Darwin's theory of evolution was for biologists, or what Newton's insights or especially Einstein's insights were for physicists, where you had all this stuff that was happening, and things were happening and in predictable ways, but they were happening for reasons we couldn't understand. They were happening so fairly consistently that you could almost predict them, but you wouldn't know why you're predicting them. You just didn't really know until all of a sudden there was a theory, and this theory had tremendous explanatory and predictive power. And this RK selection thing written by Anonymous Conservative is simply the most eye-opening theory about politics that I've ever read. I remember just time and time and time and time again, I just stop and look at it and gasp and just say, oh my God. Yeah, okay, that's it. That's why. It's so good. I actually got to the place where I said, some people have criticized it. Now that I've understood the theory, I'm going to read it again, really understand it, and then I'm going to read the criticisms of the theory so I understand what the attacks on the theory are. Maybe the whole thing's been proven to be hooey, but I don't think that's the case because it is of such predicted value that I'm even no longer that much concerned with the causality. If the correlation is as strong as it is, it's got remarkable explanatory and predictive powers. In other words, you could say that when Newton came along with his laws of gravitation, they didn't explain the cause of gravitation. You needed Einstein for that. You needed Einstein to say that this thing we call gravity is actually the result of bent space-time. That's what causes gravity. And that's why some of the equations at the far extremes of Newtonian physics weren't working out. You can say all of that, and that's obviously true. But the fact is Newtonian mechanics fits inside a relativity. And relativity may fit inside something else. And certainly will fit inside something else. But that doesn't mean that relativity disproved Newtonian mechanics. On the contrary, it explained why they work. And the point I'm trying to make is whether or not this theory is exactly correct in terms of these Darwinian social strategies and these biochemical explanations and these genetic explanations and these brain structure explanations. Every one of these pathways of proof that this guy has provided seem to make sense to me. There seem to be multiply sourced. The sourcing seems to be credible, and they, as I say earlier, Jennifer, they interlock. This makes sense that these two things would work together makes sense. And if these two things work together, you might expect this to happen, and sure enough, it does. When you get enough of these triangles put together, this matches this, and you got a triangle. Triangle is an extremely rigid shape. And if you don't believe me, by the way, just as a quick aside, take 4 sticks and nail them together into a square, and the square will just do this. It'll be a parallelogram all day. But you make a triangle. I'll tell you what, triangle's rigid. And when you build a structure out of triangles, you get this kind of, oh my gosh, what's the word for that? It's on the tip of my tongue. It'll come to me. But these things are tremendously stable. They make a lot of intellectual sense. And so I would just say, if I ever regretted anything, no. I've never come out of there saying I wish I'd said something, but I do now feel that this is it. Yeah, on the comment stream, Buck, it's the evolutionary psychology behind politics by anonymous conservatives. RK selection. You're going to be hearing an awful lot of RK from this kid from now on. I haven't really run with it yet because I really need to understand it, but I think RK is everything. I'll give you a little tease of something that is originally mine about RK, just real quick as a quick aside. According to this guy's theory, the two basic divisions in political thought, what we today call liberalism and conservatism, are lattice is the word somebody came up with. Cantilever was the word I was looking for, actually, cantilever construction. The short form here is that there are, according to the anonymous conservative, that there are different types of strategies that organisms can employ in order to succeed in an environment. And if you want to put the most number of organisms into an environment, which is what nature wants to fill up the void. Organisms will eat. As long as there's food, they'll eat. You'll never see a bacteria stop eating because it'll just make more bacteria. Put a bunch of food down for squirrels or cats or people, they'll keep eating almost all of them until they're so fat they can't eat anymore. So if you look at organisms filling up an environment, there's a formula for this apparently, and the formula has 2 variables that are of significance to us. One of the variables is R, which is the reproductive rate of the organism, small r. The higher the R, the higher the reproductive rate of each individual. All other things being equal, the more that offspring, that organism will produce more offspring. So the higher the R, the more offspring they produce. And the other part of that equation is kind of on the other end of it, and that's the actual size of the carrying capacity is the term of the environment, and that's represented by K, capital K. So R is the reproductive rate, K is the carrying capacity of the environment. And according to this guy and this book is mind-bogglingly brilliant. What he's basically saying is that there are numbers of organisms, microorganisms, will take one strategy or another depending upon how much resources there are in an environment. So for example, if you just deal with microbes and you've got a large food source, you put microbes in a giant, enormous dish of agar or whatever that growth, basically it's beef broth, they'll reproduce. And if they're in competition with a different set of the same organisms that are using the different strategy, the ones with the highest reproductive rate will win. They'll outbreed and succeed other than the others because the K-type strategy is not based on reproductive rate. It's based on fitness. It's based on relative fitness and the ability to compete. So let me back up a little bit. I'm going to get into it anyway. Every time I talk about it, I understand it a little bit better. If you have an endless field of grass, that is a R environment. Just open meadows filled with grass is an R environment. The Great Plains during America's pre-European history was just open fields of grass that covered a continent. It's more food than you could ever eat. But take an open field of green grass and you put rabbits in there. Rabbits are a very highly R-selected species. The rabbit is designed for R. So what does that mean? Well, that means that if you have two rabbit parents, and one rabbit parent has sex with every rabbit it can find as early as possible, and its children have a very low investment. They're not spending a lot of time on their children. They want the children out of the way as quickly as possible so they can go make more children. And they have sex with everything, and they don't get into fights. They run away from fights because there's all the food they could want. There's no point in competing. Competing is a waste of time. That's really the point about the R society. The R strategy is competing is a waste of time. Fitness is a waste of time. Hard thing to come to grips with, but it's absolutely true. So if you have an R-type species like a rabbit, the faster they can reproduce, the more they're going to fill the environment. K would be something like wolves in the winter. Now, if you've got wolves in the winter, you don't have an endless supply of food. On the contrary, you've got a very limited supply of food in the terms of number of wild animals out there. And so if you're a K species like a wolf, fitness matters. So you have highly competitive mating rituals to determine that only the strongest males get to mate with only the most fit females. You have group competition, but you also have group, because of that, you also have group identity, and you have group cooperation against the larger force, against other wolves, for example. You have a sense of in-group and out-group. So if you had a rabbit out in the open field of green, and all rabbits are R species. Let's say you had a K-type rabbit. So you had a rabbit that decided that it was going to put all of its effort into raising just a few very, very fit individual children, and they were going to mate the fittest, fastest, strongest rabbits they could possibly breed, and that they teach rabbits all the tricks of running from predators and so on and so on and so forth. It would not only not matter, it would fail, because while you're investing all that effort into Super Rabbit, the R-type rabbits are making thousands of rabbits whose genes are going to get passed on. Being fit doesn't help you. It's a waste of time. You should be spending the time as a rabbit that you're trying to make a fit rabbit offspring. You should be spending that time making more rabbits because their food is everywhere. You don't have to compete with other rabbits for food. There's more food than you just walk over and there's some more food, right? There's food everywhere. Likewise, if you've ever if you see new rabbits come into the field, that's not going to be a particularly big problem for you because there's plenty for everybody to eat. There is no in-group, out-group kind of thing, and so on and so on and so on and so on and so on. Anyway, what he's basically postulating is that civilizations that are in ascendance, born out of hardship and scarce resources, because there's very little food for humanity up until very recently, the human beings extremely competitive. We've had to be competitive to survive. We're a highly K-type species. But if you look at the cycle of civilizations, this is the first thing that rang my bell. This is the first thing that first of many things that rang my bell. I've always wondered about the cycle of civilizations. A slow climb over hundreds of years, and then it's an almost immediate decay. And then it's another slow climb, and then immediate decay. And then there's a long flat line of chaos and and scarcity, and slowly, you get to the point where the civilization has reached the height of its powers, and that they've done so much trading, that they've got so much wealth, they've got so much food, they're so strong militarily, they don't have any competition at all. And then something happens. So his point is that healthy societies, as we understand healthy societies that are growing, societies that are on the rise, are K-type competitive societies. And K-type creatures not only are bred for competition, they like competition. They need competition. They like it. They like head-to-head competition. They respect the rules because they want to know the outcome of competition, fair competition for fitness. And so what that really means is that human beings are K. They're competitive, fit, cooperative, hardworking. They invest in a fewer number of children and invest a lot in those kids to make sure that the best kids they can be, because they have to be. And then all of a sudden, over enough period of time, those K-type competitors produce so much abundance, they produce so much food and so much security in terms of predation and getting rid of external threats, that the society begins to look like it's got endless, infinite resources. And therefore, the entire culture turns R. And no longer worried about competition. You don't want competition. You don't want capitalism because that's competitive. And if people are in competition, then the fittest will survive. And R-type animals don't want competition because they know they're unfit. They know they're going to lose in a competition. So they give up freedom for security. They give up capitalism for communism or socialism. They start having promiscuous sex with a lot more partners. Children are sexualized at a much earlier age. There'd be thousands and thousands and thousands more R's than K's if it weren't for the one thing that's different this time around, and that's birth control. If there was no birth control, these liberals would have gigantic families. And you see this in inner city populations, especially where food is essentially just delivered by mail, right? Where there is literally nobody working, no incentive to work. You find these women who've got 10 or 11 kids or 7 kids or 6 kids, and one guy's got 9 children with 9 different moms. That's definitive R-type breeding habits. So what happens is we're a K society until we become wealthy and secure, and then the R's take over. And they take over simply to the degree that it becomes the successful strategy. It's pushing more genes forward. You're having more offspring. Somebody who's on welfare, who has 9 kids because they have nothing else to do. The food comes to them. It may be crappy food, but it's coming to them without having to go out and compete. Has 9 children, puts minimal amount of resources into these children. Are these children fit to compete with other children in terms of what humans know, in terms of their skill sets, in terms of their abilities? Of course they're not. But as long as the food is endless, those genes are going to get passed forward. And that society is successful in terms of Darwinism, in terms of pushing your genetic material forward. It's a smart play. And it just, you touch all this again and again and again. It goes back and forth, and there's so much into the brain chemistry and stuff I'm not going to get into. But one of the things that's the most chilling about this theory is this. This is hard to believe, hard to understand, but it makes sense to me. If you are an R-type individual in a K-type society, in other words, if you are a relatively unfit individual and you know that you don't have a chance really to succeed against competitive groups of warrior-type people, a lot of interesting things happen to you. And I'm going to not speak about individuals now because I don't think people realize this on an individual basis. Think of it as a group. Unfit people who have a psychological aversion to competition because of this R-type behavior have something else in common. According to this book and according to the studies, they found out that conservatives have a much more developed part of the brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala, according to liberals who've also found the same data, the liberals call this the fear center. And they like to say, see, conservatives have a larger, more active fear center in their brain, and that's why they're so irrational and primitive. They're irrational and primitive, and they see danger everywhere that doesn't exist, and they go on and on and on and on and on. And that's why conservatives are driven by fear, and that's why they're so anti-intellectual. Well, it turns out the amygdala is not a fear center, and it is much larger and more activated in conservatives than it is in liberals. But the amygdala is not the fear center. The amygdala is the threat assessment center. which drives fear, what the amygdala does is it provides an unpleasant stimulus to the organism, an unpleasant psychological stimulus. It triggers a sense of fear. But it's not the fear center. It sends the signal to the fear center, but what it does is it analyzes threats. So the example he gives in the book is, in the book, if you are walking along one day, minding your own business, and you hear the rustle of grass and a twig snap, and then a cougar jumps on your back, if you survive the experience, your amygdala has processed those two events, has processed the stimulus of the audio of the grass rustling and twig snapping, and the virtually immediate descent of a predator on you. And so the amygdala makes this threat assessment and then basically says to your brain, the next time you hear grass rustling or a twig snap or any kind of sharp sound, you turn around and prepare to fight or flee. You're filled with adrenaline and you turn around. You face the threat. That's learned behavior with a negative psychological stimulus, but it's learned behavior and it saves your lives. And this ability is significantly depressed in liberal brains. So his point is, liberals are not able, they don't have the brainware. It can be developed, it's something you can develop, but they don't have the brainware to perceive threats accurately or reliably. And this is one of the reasons why you see them so often siding with criminals against policemen and siding with their country's enemies against their country. People who take the side of the communists or people who take the side of the Islamicists just naturally gravitate to them. Because, number one, they are incapable of assessing threats. Now, this is not hardwired. This is the main point. I'm not trying to say people are hardwired this way. Neither is he. He's calling them, I call them, he didn't call them this, I call them psychological attractors. They're like magnets. They're like strange attractors in chaos theory. They tend to pull things towards them. You have tendencies, but they're not insurmountable. Right after 9/11, our society became very K. Large numbers of people had their amygdala severely stimulated on that day, and I was one of them. But I wanted to be a fighter pilot from the beginning. I was always a K kid. And so that threat assessment was a little hard to put away. And for a while, people understood this was a real problem. But over time, Al-Qaeda did the best thing they could have done, which was they left us alone. They remained quiet. So that threat center was then slowly destimulated and went back down to this kind of more prosperity, more safety. It must have just been a bad dream, R. But here's the point I was trying to make about the R. This is the stuff that'll really, really, really freak you out and certainly made me sit up in one of many, many cases. They said if you're a non-competitive type individual, if you've got an R strategy, psychology, you're drawn to that, just emotionally drawn to it. You don't like conflict. The idea of conflict and winning a conflict in terms of capitalism is conflict and warfare and so on. So if you're a communist and a pacifist, these things appeal to you because you don't like conflict. It makes you uncomfortable. You have an understimulated amygdala. So he's saying that's why when somebody draws a picture of a gun, somebody freaks out and calls the cops because they're so understimulated that little things set them off. Here's the part that'll really get to you. One of the best strategies for an R-type non-competitive individual who does not want to compete because he doesn't think he can because he's not fit enough, one of their strategies is to identify with the enemy, because the direct threat to an American R-type psychology is not Al-Qaeda. They can't assess that threat. Their amygdalas are deficient. What they see successful Americans as their primary threat. And so they have a natural Darwinian philosophy and psychology that makes them sympathize with the enemy because they think that the enemy's warriors can cull and reduce our warriors. That it's the reduction of the domestic warriors that is actually a significant advantage for them. That if we reduce the fit Americans, the unfit Americans, and it's not just physical fitness, it's just survivability. If you reduce the number of fit Americans, the breeding opportunities for unfit Americans goes up. So they sympathize with the enemy because they don't have a good threat assessment area. And it's in their interest. It's in their personal genetic interest to have their warriors cull our warriors. And you can even take that argument to go even further and say they actually have a genetic advantage if an enemy defeats our warriors, because docility and lack of aggression and lack of competitive instincts, the lack of the willingness to fight, means that if an enemy eliminates all of the competitive Americans, the only ones left are the non-competitive Americans who have their heads down and are not fighters anyway. Now all of a sudden they make a perfect subject species, and they're perfectly willing to live in subjugation. They get the resources, they get the women, they get the food, they get whatever. It's called RK, and a couple people have mentioned it. Somebody's got the title, and I'll link to it when I get it a little bit better. But it goes on and on and on, and all of these things tie together. They all make sense to me. They really do. One of the examples he uses in the book, a profound example, I think, extremely illustrative, is the example of cuttlefish. Cuttlefish are actually fairly K-selected species, and when cuttlefish comes time to mate, because they have to be fit, right? They have to escape from predators. The ocean's not a friendly, peaceful place to be. And so when cuttlefish are in mating rituals, what they do is the females are smaller than the males. They have shorter tentacles, and they're duller colors, and the females go down to the seabed, and they find suitable mating areas like crevices and rocks and so on. And up above them, in the waters up above them, the males go through these incredible dominance displays, and these dominant displays are filled with these tremendously highly evolved series of pigmentations, and the strongest and fittest males have the best dominance displays, and they're also bigger and stronger, just like the rest of nature. And so the males will fight it out and do the dominance display, and if the dominance display doesn't intimidate the smaller male, then they'll get into an actual fight, and then the fittest will survive, and the fittest cuttlefish will go down and mate with the female cuttlefish, and the cuttlefish species is kept strong. But as this guy points out, there is a certain type of unfit, smaller male cuttlefish that on some immediate level understands it can never compete with the other males. It's too small and too weak to compete with the males. So what this male cuttlefish does is he draws his tentacles in, and he assumes a very dull color, and he assumes the shape and color of a female, and he goes right through these warring males who would never let him pass if they recognize him as a male. He goes through these warring males disguised as a female, and he simply goes down to where the females are and mates with them. That's Woody Allen, right? That's Woody Allen and ants. You guys go out and duke it out, and I'll report back to battalion. So, all this stuff actually makes a big species of sense to me. And he talks about the brain. He talks about the brain chemistry, and certain types of child rearing produces certain types of brain chemistries that either lead you towards conservatism or liberalism and so on. He's not saying it's genetic, and I don't think anybody would say it's genetic. I started thinking about this. I said, well, I used to be a lot more liberal when I was in college. Did I change? It's like, no, you saw the Thunderbirds when you were 5. You wanted to be a fighter pilot. You were first in your class. You were highly competitive in your high school in Bermuda, junior high and high school. And the reason you got to be a lot more liberal when you were in college was because you were surrounded by theater people, and you wanted to get the girls, and you wanted to be popular. And everybody there was completely R-selected. There you go. A lot of people say, somebody says you suggest social Darwinism, which is a dead idea for a reason. This idea of people competing for resources is called social Darwinism, but the idea of people multiplying for resources is also social Darwinism. One of the things that's so explanatory about all this stuff, and tell me this doesn't have the ring of truth to it, K-type psychologies are competitive psychologies like wolves and so on. They're fitness related, and so what they want is they want competition, and they want rules that determine a fair outcome, because K-type psychologies basically say that, well, if that guy works harder than me, he should be entitled to more money than I do. It just makes sense. R-type people don't see that at all. But K-type psychologies, because they're constantly in competition, since they're constantly kind of in perpetual state of struggle, they have a very, very high regard for rules, and they have a very high regard for in-group structures. And so we have a large respect for law and order and rules on the conservative side of the spectrum. And I don't think liberals do. It's not in their interest to respect the rules. It's in their interest to succeed on their own. And when you look at all of the all of the lawlessness that's going on in Washington now. You look at the president just changing rules at a whim. When you look at Congress just refusing to even acknowledge the existence of the Fourth Amendment or the Second Amendment or the First Amendment. These are the rules. These are the laws. We agree with the laws because K-type psychologists, K-type strategists such as myself, speaking for myself here, I'd rather lose by playing by the rules than win by cheating, because I'm wired that way. I'd rather lose and have played fair. I'd rather lose fairly than cheat by winning. Cheating to win is morally and psychologically repugnant to me. That makes sense among a K-type individual. But an R-type individual, rules are for chumps, which seems to me why this R-type psychology, according to these guys, these liberals, have this rule which says, well, this law is what allowed Teddy Kennedy to make it into the Senate. Well, now Republicans using that law to get into the Senate. No. Whoa. That means we have to change the law. Now he's not allowed to get into the Senate this way. Oh, okay. Well, now there's another Democrat who wants to get in, but now the law won't let him. Change the rule back. They do this all the time. They change the rules on eligibility. They change the rules on everything. Voter fraud is just openly mocking of the rules. Somebody here in the comment section says, well, hold on, I thought the liberals are the ones who are making tons of laws. Well, we want to be free. We do want to be free. They're making laws to suppress competition, and then they're individually cheating on the laws. They understand that laws only apply to K-type individuals. They understand that it's part of a K psychology to play by the rules. So, yeah, they play by the rules. Rather, they enforce the rules and then they break them, and that's how it works. And it's another point that this guy brings out that I think is really, really interesting, and that is that R-type animals and R-type cultures and R-type organisms they accept predation, and they'll accept high levels of predation. This is the key, according to this guy, is that the predation has to be indiscriminate predation. In other words, the predation has to basically be non-discriminatory in favor of fitness. In other words, liberals will tolerate a lot of crime, and they tolerate a lot of crime as long as it's not directly aimed at them. Because as it turns out, and again, a lot of this is subconscious, this is this guy's theories, of subconscious survival strategies. If you think about it, if you have a population and there are R's and K's in the population, and the K's will outcompete the R's, it's in the interest of R's to have random predation, because if predators are pulling first a K, then an R, then a K, then an R, well, the R's reproduce faster than the K's do. It's in the R's interest to have non-specific predation. And if you look at R societies like the Soviet Union or China, the mortality rate is astronomical. It's enormous how many people are killed in those societies. We K-type people don't tolerate it because that predation could go against one of our highly invested children. It's not acceptable. So it's all about general psychological attractors. And here's a little thought experiment that I came up with. It's nice that I can always contribute a penny or two to this giant fortune of ideas. And that's this. Humans, as I said, are a highly K-selected species. And America is an extremely K version of humanity, and conservatives are an extremely K version of Americans. And so those of you who are watching the show are probably about as K as you get. So here's a little thought experiment I came up with, because I like thought experiments. What would you do if one day you were suddenly to wake up? Let's say that all of us watching this show right now, how many people are online right this second watching live? At this instant, it looks like there are 200 of us, 202 people. So let's say that all 200 of us K-selected humans woke up tomorrow, and we woke up on the Serengeti Plain in the bodies of gazelles. All right? And we still had our full intellects, and we still had the ability to communicate. We just woke up in the body of gazelles. Now, gazelles are an extremely R-type, herd-type personality or psychology. They're an R-type species. They don't have a lot of investment in their children. They produce as many children as they can. They get rid of them as quickly as they can. And R-type animals like like antelopes or gazelles, would basically say, well, there is predation on us, but it's random, and the basic psychology of the R-type person individually is, yes, there's a lion out there, and yes, that lion is killing gazelles, but I don't have to, the chance of the lion picking me is small. It's 1 in 200 right now, so I got a pretty good chance, number one. Number two, I don't like competition. I'm not going to fight the lion. And number three, frankly, what the R-type individual ultimately says is, I don't have to run faster than the lion. I just have to run faster than Fred, and Fred's got a gammy leg. So as long as I'm faster than the slowest gazelle, I've got very little to worry about. My strategy is, let's just go on eating, and when he comes, we'll run, and as long as I'm not the slowest gazelle in the herd, I should be fine. But if the 200 of us woke up as gazelles, we wouldn't think that way at all, because we are wired to fight. We're built to fight. We don't like threats, and we have a great deal of investment in our children. We mate later, and we want our children to mate later, because if children have sexual activity later, then they are at their prime fitness when they do mate, so they have a better choice for better husband, better wife, and so on. So if 200 of us woke up as gazelles tomorrow morning, I could tell you what would happen. We'd all get together, and we would basically say, who's the strongest 20 of us? Who are the biggest, strongest 20 gazelles with the longest horns? All right, us? Great. We're going to go find where those goddamn lions are, pardon the French, and we're going to go over there, and we're going to gore those bastards until there's none of them left. We're just going to go find out where they are, we're going to track them down, and we're going to kill them. Because there's only 6 of them, and there's 200 of us. And somebody might say, well, you're gazelles, you don't have claws, you can't bring down a lion. My response would be, we don't have to bring down a lion. We just gore them, or we run them off. Well, if you run them off, they run back. Well, if we run them off, then we kill their cubs. We trample their cubs to death. We run them off, we kill the pregnant females, trample their cubs, and pretty soon there won't be any lions. And this business about us all just spreading out on the Serengeti and having grass, those days are over. From now on, we're going to move in a unit, and we're going to have the 30 strongest males on the outside, and we're going to run a convoy over this Serengeti. We're going to put the weakest and the strongest, not just the children, the old ones as well. They're going to go in the middle. Then we're going to have females on the outside of those, and the weaker males outside of those, and the stronger males on the outside of those. And when we see a lion, we're going to all do our little thing, and we're going to send out our distress call, and instead of running away, we are all going to run directly on that lion, and that lion may get 1 or 2 of us, but all we have to do is gore that lion. We don't have to kill the lion. All we have to do is wound him, because if we wound the lion won't be fast enough to catch any of us. And we wound all the lions are gone, and our problem is over. That's what happens when you instantaneously turn gazelles into a K-type species. You give them K-type psychology, and the problem goes away. Same thing with rabbits. There's a field full of rabbits, and we all woke up tomorrow, and there were 200 of us out in the field, and we were all rabbits. And we had our kids out there, and we had all this food out there. We wouldn't just say, hey, all the food we want to, well, they get a couple. These are our people we're talking about. We have in-group loyalties. Our animals don't have this. It just doesn't exist for them. They don't have any loyalty to them, to other groups of individuals who they've had to compete with and as a group against. So if we were 200 rabbits and we found out there were 5 hawks that were taking a rabbit a day, we would simply say, no, those days of us just going off and eating are over. We move together in a group, we stay together in a group, and when the hawk gets hungry enough to come down into the middle of that group, every single one of the big, strong male rabbits is going to jump on that hawk, and we're going to start eating his eyes out, and we're going to start eating the feathers, we're going to start trying to break the wings, we're going to do everything we can. All we have to do is wound the hawk, because we're already fast enough to get away from the hawk 2 times out of 3. We're just going to have to wound them or kill them. And then there's no problem. Then there are no more hawks. That's how K-type psychology in an R-type organism would work. So start asking yourself, what would an R-type psychology do in a K-type organism? What would you do if you were a rabbit? You didn't want conflict. You didn't want competition. You didn't want insecurity. You wanted to mate as frequently as possible, consume all the resources you had, and do as little as possible as you possibly could for it. What would you do? What would that society look like? I'm telling you, this guy's onto something. He's really onto something. I don't know. I think it's the key to understanding everything. I'm going to start doing common sense resistance things with the fist and the wrench, and below that it's going to say R/K, and then below that it's going to say be the K. Be the K. All right? This is the idea. Because when you have, in his term in the book was, the groups of K-type individuals who are competitors, when those people come together for a larger group benefit, he calls them warriors. And groups of Rs that come together for a larger benefit to the Rs, he calls appeasers. And you cannot defeat the warriors. Competitive individuals working together they're unbeatable. So you have to use things against them. And what the R-type psychology appears to be doing to us today is they are using, I've said this before, I've understood this for a long time. I've never understood it before the theory. There's a lot of things I've known about, but I've never understood before this theory. And one of the things I've known about but not understood is, why do liberals why are they so comfortable with breaking the laws, changing the rules to suit them all the time, and we don't? Why, in other words, why don't we go to Washington right now with muskets and torches and pull these tyrants out of office? Why don't we do it? Why don't we just violently throw Barack Obama out of office? Why? If we're such competitive K-type individuals, why do we put up with it? Why do we know we should, but we don't? Why? It's because he was elected, right? Because he was elected. Because he played by the rules. And we would rather lose by the rules than win by cheating. He won. We're stuck with it. Why don't our representatives do more than they do? I don't know. Couldn't we get better people? We should have better people. What happened? Well, we had an election, we lost. And so they are changing the rules and playing our ability and our desire, and not just our desire, our programming to respect the rules against us. And that's what Saul Alinsky said when he said in Rules for Radicals, if you want to beat conservatives, hold them up, make them accountable to their own morality, not to our morality. We don't have any morality. Make them accountable to their own morality. We have morality, and so we play by the rules. Barack Obama won 2 elections, whether he won them fairly or not, I don't know, but we play by the rules. So, man, I'll tell you what, everything I look at nowadays is like, oh, that's an R strategy, that's a K strategy, this is R strategy. It's just, it is. And we have to play by the rules as K-type creatures because these rules are built into our genetic makeup. If we didn't have rules, if wolves, which are a very K species, if wolves didn't have rules, there wouldn't be any wolves left, right? Wolves have rules. They have very strict rules, pack rules. They have rules about who eats first and in what order. And when wolves get into a conflict, when wolves get into a mating ritual, a dominance ritual, they will fight with their teeth. But the instant that one of the wolves has decided he's lost the battle, he shows his throat. And by surrendering, it instantly disarms the superior wolf. It instantly just turns the aggression off. It's just switches it off. It doesn't switch it off 10 minutes later. These wolves are in a dogfight for their lives, and the second that one wolf says, okay, I surrender, you're stronger than I am, the dominant wolf just stops. He just stops. So, I don't know. I'm going to read it again because I want to understand it. I'm going to read the criticisms of it. But it makes perfect sense to me. And this business about identifying with the enemies, about identifying with the enemy because you've got poor threat assessment. You don't see him as a threat because you can't really assess him. The only thing you see as a threat are the people that are in direct competition with you now. Rooting for the enemy's warriors to cull our warriors, or to create a society where all of our competitive Americans are gone. Well, we'll live as dhimmis under the Islamist boot, or better read than dead. I never had this thought till just this second. That is the essence of the R human psychology. Better read than dead. That's all you need to know. That was the attitude for 50 years among the left here in the country as we were fighting this Cold War against this god-awful evil. Better read than dead. In other words, I'd rather lose my freedom and stay alive, which means freedom doesn't mean much to you. You don't value it the way we do. In other words, what's so wrong with being red, right? Red means we all starve together, or we all get the food pellet together. None of us are better than others. There's no competitive advantage. Better red than dead. A lot of people lost their lives because they kind of thought better dead than red. And this whole idea of living on your feet or dying on your knees, or, I regret that I have one life to give for my country. These are all K-type philosophies. That's a better philosophy. It's more successful. Anyway, isn't that interesting? I've taken 3 questions, and we've been talking for an hour and 39 minutes. I'll go till 8. I've got another 10 minutes. Let's see. If you could fly once, any airplane, X and prototypes included from history, what would it be? Test drive any car, own any gun? Hard for me to identify airplanes. I think I've shown you pictures of the Viper jet, the private two-seat version. I'd much rather have one of those. I'd love to fly a Viper jet. That'd be fun. I can't just give you one answer on even on airplanes. I can give you a couple, though. I'd love to fly an F-16. I'd love to fly an F-18, for real. I'd love to fly a Spitfire. And I'd love to fly a P-51 Mustang. It'd be kind of a kick to be behind the stick of a SR-71. But that's about it for airplanes. That's what leaps to mind. The Spitfire I have a particularly strong emotional attachment to because of this K background of mine. It's not my favorite airplane, but it's certainly beautiful. But the reason I think if I could be anywhere in history, one place in history, if Bill, you could move and do anything and be anywhere, I would be flying a Spitfire in the Battle of Britain. That's as good as it got for me in my mind. I've felt this virtually my entire life. I would fly Spitfires in the Battle of Britain. You're defending your country. You're defending your in-group. You are going up there against the best that the enemy has to offer in head-to-head competition for the survival of everything you believe in. It's one-on-one, warrior-to-warrior, skill-based combat, and the stakes are as high as they could be. Not just for you, for everybody. I think coming out of the Battle of Britain as a Spitfire pilot, forget coming out, forget all the women, forget all the accolades, forget Churchill and the few, and forget the parades, and forget the respect, and you never have to buy another drink. You can put all of that aside, right? You come home at the end of a day, you're surrounded by 10 or 15 of your squadron mates, and you've just lost 3 of them, and these people are your friends, and it's like, we may not live another day, we may not get out of this week, we may not get out of tomorrow morning, but we're here now. And then you just get out there, and the next morning you get up, and you and your friends get into these airplanes, and you go in the sky, and you do it again. You do it 6 times a day sometimes, 6 times a day. Guys would routinely land these airplanes. This happened all the time in the later days of the Battle of Britain before the end, when they were just really eroding the RAF airfields. You'd have these young men, 20-year-old, 21, 22-year-old men, would come home after their 4th or 5th or 6th mission, and the plane would land, and they'd land the plane and they'd chop the throttle, and the plane would just coast to a stop, and it wouldn't taxi in. They had to get in a Jeep or something and drive out to the airplane. The guys sound asleep in the airplane with the engine running. Yep. That must have been something. That must have been quite a feeling, I would think, to just go. And you got not just women and kids down there. You got your women and kids down there. You're fighting over your farms and over your villages and over your territory, and you're watching these incoming enemy bombers bombing your cities and killing your people, and there's nothing that will stop them. The anti-aircraft is absolutely, essentially, for all intents and purposes, British anti-aircraft was for all intents and purposes useless. You got old people, you got kids down there. They're getting bombed in front of your eyes, and the only thing you've got is a throttle and a control column and a gun trigger and a little bit of skill and a little bit of guts and radar. Yeah, man. That's it. Jacob Golden, that was Chris Taylor, by the way. Jacob Golden says, any Strata Lounge merchandise? Definitely coming. We're going to do it differently than we did the membership merchandise. We're going to, right now we're sitting on boxes and boxes of T-shirts, which we have to ship. I feel very strongly that with the merchandise that we want to do, we'll probably just do that where we don't touch it. And that way we can do a lot more designs and not sit on all of this merchandise. And then we can, put a lot more designs out, and we'll make a couple bucks off of the T-shirt. Make less, but, Yeah, so that Stratosphere Lounge is coming, and Common Sense Resistance merchandise is coming too. I gave myself to 8:30, so I got to be someplace at 8:30, so I can go to 8. Favorite episode of Star Trek: The Original Series? Great question, Matt. My geek question for the night. It's Balance of Terror. It's the one where the Enterprise is the destroyer, and the Romulan bird of prey is the submarine. That's just my favorite one. I think it's the most military one. I think it's got a lot of back and forth. It's just cool. Off the top of my head was my favorite episode. You make the case that some are better episodes in terms of, the story arc or the big reveal. Everybody says City on the Edge of Forever was the best Star Trek episode. It was excellent. But in terms of sheer emotional satisfaction, it's Balance of Terror with Mark Leonard as the Romulan commander who went on to play Spock's father. Yeah, and Kirk gets his butt handed to him, and then he wins. That's what he does. Here's a Tiemann's question. What do you know? Can't take it, Josh. I'm sorry. I got one more I want to do, and I'm gonna sacrifice the Tiemann's to the cause. I'll take two more. Dave Olson's question, very simple. Which Lost in Space theme do you prefer? The original from the show when it was in black and white and didn't stink, or the one by John Williams when the show was in color and had talking vegetables? Hate to correct you, Dave, but the original theme was used in seasons 1 and 2, so it was the black and white season and the color season. And the John Williams theme when the show was in color had talking vegetables was season 3, but what you may not know is that the original theme was also written by John Williams. Yes, that John Williams. John Williams wrote the theme for Lost in Space, and between seasons 2 and 3, they rebooted the theme and the opening credits and did a much more high-energy one. The original one was bum 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 ba-da-dum boom ba-da-da-da-da-da-dum bum 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 ba-da-dum boom ba-da-da-da-da-dum. That was the original one, and the new one was had a really high energy thing. It was bum ba 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 bum 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 ba 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 bum 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 ba 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 bum bum bum. I like the second one better, actually. The first one had a much more emotional appeal because that's the one that really got me hooked into Lost in Space, and I would sit there and wait for that for 2 years, like every single night. My entire universe was waiting for Lost in Space to come on. But the second theme was just kick-ass. They were both great themes. And then finally, I think the last one I'll take tonight is from Donald Mitchell, I guess. I'm looking to get a pilot's license, and I understand getting started with gliders is a cheaper way to start the process. Do you still fly gliders? And if you can, explain what you'd look for in a school. I'm about 20 minutes north of you on the 5 freeway in SoCal. Any recommendations would be great, but generic information is fine also. I would start in gliders not because it's cheaper, although I suspect it probably is. I'd start in gliders because it's a much better way to learn how to fly. First of all, the main reason to learn how to fly gliders is because if you learn to fly power airplanes, the day may come where you find yourself in a glider, which has happened to me twice. And having that propeller stop turning and suddenly realizing you're in a glider is an awful lot more easy to deal with psychologically and in terms of your skill set when you've done it 100 times. You will never have an experience as a glider pilot suddenly finding yourself as a powered pilot, but you may find yourself as a powered pilot finding yourself a glider pilot, and I think if you're a glider pilot, you'll have a very clear idea of exactly what to do, and you won't be stressed at all. It'll just suddenly little switch will throw in the back of your head like it did on mine. It's like, oh, I'm a glider now. Okay, great, no problem. I know how to do that. So that's the number one reason. Number two, it is less expensive, but the main reason to learn how to fly gliders first, Donald, is that it separates out all the variables. This isn't true for military airplanes, but it's true for virtually every airplane in the sky. Very, very, very few airplanes are not part of this equation. I'll give you just one little example that's going to seem counterintuitive, but it's absolutely true, and that's why you need to start in gliders. Most people think that if you're flying along in an airplane, a Cessna 172, let's say, they think that if you want to climb, you pull back on the stick, but that's not what you do, because the stick controls pitch, the up and down motion of the airplane. And in most every airplane, pitch does not control altitude. Pitch controls airspeed. If you want to climb in a Cessna 172, you don't pull back on the stick. You want to climb in a Cessna 172, you leave the stick exactly where it is and you add power, because your trimmed airspeed is determined by your pitch. So if you're flying along at 80 knots, let's say, and your nose is at a certain angle above the horizon, if you want to climb and you pull back on the stick, you'll actually slow down. You climb a little bit, but you'll slow down. You'll just mush along at a slower airspeed. If you add power, on the other hand, the plane will climb at 80 knots. And if you want to descend, you come back on the plane will descend at 80 knots. Now, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense because most people think that if you want to climb, you come back on the stick, or if you add power. But power, pitch controls airspeed, power controls altitude. Doesn't make any sense at all. But if you're in a glider, it makes perfect sense, because in a glider, there is no power. So the beautiful thing about flying a glider is you're basically taking one set of variables completely out of the equation, and you're left with just the fundamentals of flying. And that primary fundamental is your airspeed will be controlled by your pitch, period. You want to go faster, you put the nose down. You want to go slower, you pull the nose up. Since you don't have any power behind the airplane, there is no throttle basically, you'll learn that you will have to move forward through the air at a certain speed, and if you go slower than that speed, you're going to stall, and if you stall too close to the ground, you're going to die. So you are always moving through the air at a certain speed. And you begin to realize that you want to slow down, you pull the nose up. You want to speed up, you push the nose down. That is a fundamental, primary, primitive response that will get right into your bloodstream from the get-go as a glider pilot. Will not be nearly as clear for you in a powered airplane. And so there's that. The other thing you'll learn as a glider pilot, almost all of your soaring flight, you're going up through air that's rising faster than you're descending through it, all of your soaring flight is going to mean that you're going to learn how to fly in a 60-degree bank at 2 or 3 knots above the stall. I mean, the first time I ever soloed an aircraft, I got off a tow at 2,000 feet. I hooked a thermal, and I was flying a thermal for 10 or 15 minutes, and I got out of the thermal and came back and landed. But the first time I ever soloed in an airplane, I was in a 60-degree bank at 2 knots above a stall, and it was all in the seat of my pants. I could feel where I knew where the stall was. I knew if I came back a little bit more on the stick, I was going to break and out of the controlled flight into a stall, and I knew how to recover from a stall. And I knew 60 degrees of bank is a tight bank. If you get your training in powered airplanes, you'll see a 60-degree bank for maybe a minute or two while you're practicing steep turns, and that's all you'll ever see of it. You'll spend a few moments right at the edge of the stall when you're practicing stall recoveries as part of your emergency training, and that's all you'll ever see of it. But in a glider, to succeed, you're going to spend all of your flight time, or a significant portion of your flight time, you're going to go looking for the boundaries, the outside of the envelope. What's the minimum flyable airspeed of this aircraft? That's part of the performance envelope. And you'll live out there in the envelope, and that's where your skills will develop. And you'll develop a sense of seat-of-the-pants flying that will never leave you. And you'll feel it in your bones when the plane is going too slow. And you'll know what happens when you go too slow. And you'll know what a too slow emergency means. It doesn't mean add power, because maybe your power's faulty, or maybe you're out of power, maybe your engine's failed, maybe you're out of gas. You'll know I'm going too slow. You will instantly push the nose forward, nose forward, nose forward, nose down, nose down, nose down. We just had a rope break. Nose down. We just had an engine failure. Nose down. Because if you don't get that nose down and get that speed back, you're not in an airplane anymore. You're in 6,000 pounds of aluminum and steel and plexiglass. It's only an airplane when it's going forward through the air at 45 knots or greater for the general population. And there's no amount of wishful thinking that will make it fly much slower than that. So, yeah, it's a great thing for emergencies. It's a great thing for training. And then once you have the fundamentals, just what we would call stick and rudder skills, you're just a good stick. You know, seat-of-the-pants flying. You know what the rudder does. You know what the stick does. And because gliders have such long wings, it's a little complicated. But because they have such long wings and such low drag wings, that when you use ailerons on a glider, because the wings are so far out and the moment is so far, the arm is so long, the moment is greater. When you make a banked turn in a glider, adverse yaw, or aileron drag is another word for it, is very high. And that means that you will learn how to do a coordinated turn in a glider in a way that you'd never learn how to do it in an airplane, powered airplane. When you fly an airplane and you turn the airplane banks into the turn. Part of the component of lift, the lift that the wings are lifting up against gravity, when you bank the airplane, that lift vector becomes part vertical and part horizontal. That's why you have to pull back on the stick. You have to generate more lift in a turn. So what happens when you turn is that lift vector turns with you, and that lift vector then becomes a horizontal component and a vertical component. And it's a horizontal component that pulls you around the turn. So far, so good. But when you start to bank the airplane to the left, the upper aileron is creating more lift, which is making it go up, but it's also creating more drag. So paradoxically, When you start a turn to the left, if you don't use any rudder, the plane actually yaws to the right. It actually does the exact opposite of what you want it to do. And the further out those ailerons are, the longer the wings and the cleaner the airplane, the more obvious that will be. So there's only one purpose for the rudder, and the rudder is to make sure that you keep the tail behind you in a turn. It makes the turn coordinated. And since this effect is more exaggerated in a glider, you're going to be real good with your coordination, your rudder coordination. These are all just fundamental things that will happen to you, and you'll just learn to do them the right way. And turn coordination is going to be a valuable thing to have when you get an instrument flying in a powered airplane. It's a real valuable thing to have in an emergency. If you don't have power, you want clean turns. You don't want any drag. You want everything to be as clean as you can. And then the final thing I'll say about it is, and this is probably of all the things I've mentioned, this is the greatest single thing. If you're in a glider, you have extraordinarily good situational awareness. This is worth everything I've said put together. I can't believe it took me this long to come to this. I almost forgot it. If you start as a glider pilot, I know it's time. It's 8 o'clock. I can go fast. I got a fast car. If you are in a glider, you are never, ever, ever thinking la 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 la. La 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 la. I'm going from Santa Monica to Santa Maria. La 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 la. When you are in a glider, and especially if you're trying to go cross country in a glider, you are aware of every single landing spot. You know where the next airport is. You know where the last airport is. You know which one is closer. You know down there's a field I could land in. There's a road I could take. I could take that pasture over here. That open patch looks good. There's nothing down here but mountains. If I have to land in the mountains, I got to land uphill. I'll take that mountainside. And you are constantly aware of what the air is doing. Is the air rising? Is the air sinking? Air goes up and down, not just side to side with the wind, goes up and down. I'm in lift, I'm in sink, always aware of it. So you will never, ever, ever, ever find yourself in a situation where I don't know where I am, I don't know where I'm going, and I don't know where I'm going to go. Glider pilots are awesome in that regard. We'll do a flying edition of Threaten It Forever. I've taken some test footage, and I'll take some more on a better day. Thanks for coming out on Valentine's Day, guys. It's Valentine's Day. I got to split. But it's been fun to see you all, and I'm glad we got a chance to do the show this week. We missed one a couple weeks ago, and I don't want to miss one again if I can help it. So I hope you all have a great Valentine's Day out there. Thanks for the questions. And as always, thanks for the support. It means the world to me. And be careful out there. We'll see you next time. Okay, take care now. Bye-bye.